Hello and welcome to Quilt Addicts Anonymous. I'm Soebbing. Today we're going to be making Singularity, which is a brand new Stashin with Stephanie fat quarter friendly pattern. I really love this one. It just goes to show you how versatile half square triangles can be. It's a really simple block to make, and I'm going to show you how to make them 2 at a time in today's tutorial, which makes it much more accurate and much more likely that your points are going to end up where they belong and not get all stretched out of place. So we're going to go over all those tips and tricks today. Plus we've got the pattern to go with it. We called it Singularity because I wanted to create kind of this elongated shape with these really bright and vibrant colors that I'm using today. And our video editor thought that it looked like the threads that bind the universe together. So that's how we came up with that name. So before we get into the actual tutorial of how we do this, we're going to talk a little bit about Stashin with Stephanie, the club that I designed this pattern for. You don't have to be a member to grab the pattern, but if you do, then you can get it for free, and we'll tell you about that in just a second. And we're going to take a look at the beautiful fabric that I'm going to be using in today's design. Stashin with Stephanie is a subscription club that we developed here at Quilt Addicts Anonymous to allow you guys to quilt on a budget. So when you join, you get a coupon code to download any 12 PDF Stashin with Stephanie patterns that you want. And you can get that for free with your membership as soon as you join, and that's a $144 value. Then about a month after you join, you're going to get your first bundle in the mail. It's a 10-piece fat quarter bundle, and it always contains the freshest, newest modern fat quarters that we can find. And I really love picking this out. I go through everything that's coming out from the modern fabric lines, and I pick the one that I think is the strongest for the month and that I think you guys are really going to love. We try to have a good variety of fabrics and manufacturers that we bring in, and you get that for $32.49 plus shipping, but that's a $40 value. So you're saving about $8 there as well. Then we develop a pattern inspired by the fabric, and that you can grab each month along with one other pattern for free as long as you're a member. So that's a $24 add-on value for you. So we're getting lots and lots of free goodies there. Once you've been a member for 6 months, you get unlimited access to all of our Stashin with Stephanie patterns, which is a more than $400 value of free patterns. So it's worth sticking around for in order to get that. You also get 20% off any additional fabric that you want to get. So if you want to take your bundle and turn that into a full quilt kit, we have what we call finishing kits to help make that happen. So you can get the fat quarters you didn't get, plus background and binding to make a full quilt out of that. Or if you want to get any extra yardage because you have another project in mind for one of the patterns you grab from us or anything else, backing fabric, all those goodies, you can get that and save 20% as long as you are a member. And that's not all. You also get 30% off my 2 fat quarter books, and that is Fat Quarter Workshop and Fat Quarter Patchwork Quilts, and I'll sign those for you if you get them from us, and we'll send them on your way. So lots of really good things there that you can check out. We also always have these tutorials available for you, as well as a quilting tutorial on how I quilt it. So lots of really good goodies there and lots of awesome things that you can get and really get some value. So that way you can really bust that stash, but also add some fun new things to it. So that way you are replacing some of it as you get through using those fat quarter friendly patterns. All right, we're going to take a quick look at Find the Birds from FreeSpirit Fabrics. Really love this collection. It's really bright and vibrant, and my team really enjoyed folding it, and I've enjoyed sewing with it. This was really a team effort quilt this month. I had a lot of other deadlines, some things you've seen already, like the Nocturne quilt, and some things that you won't see for a little bit yet because they're a little secret, but they're coming. But I had a lot of help getting this together this month to get those half square triangles done. But it was really fun, and we're going to take a peek at the fabric before we go too much further here. So my aunt, who I think is our longest running Stashin with Stephanie member, is not a fan of birds. So Aunt Carol, you're going to have to cut this one up small so you don't necessarily see the birds. But this is a really fun design. It looks like it's been like painted with brush strokes, and it really is a lot going on here, and it looks very tropical and really bold, vibrant colors. I don't want to call them bright because it doesn't seem bright to me, but it's definitely very bold. The other thing that I think that this artist did a really great job of doing is these little dots here. They're just yellow, but they look metallic because of the way that they've been executed on the fabric. It really is stunning. It's been a real joy to work with this. So this collection only had 12 fabrics in it. So we used this new scallops line from FreeSpirit as sort of a blender. FreeSpirit doesn't really have blenders, but in the last 2 years, they've come out with the scallops and then also a line called seeds that really can be used to mix and match. And this one was really fun. My team was really, I loved hearing them talk as they were cutting it up. They thought it was great because it really is just two colors, but there's enough texture in it to draw the eye and make it interesting and not just be like a plain Jane fabric. This is one of the pieces that actually really draws your eye when the quilt block is put together because it shows up as brighter than the others, because this is kind of one of the lighter fabrics that we have in terms of color, but because it's that very medium blue, it really pops at you. And I love how we're using this magenta that we're going to see later in there as well. Here's that scallops again, this time in like a bluey teal. And this is a really good transitional color as we get into the lighter blues and then greens. This is the most basic print in the entire line. Everything else has a lot going on with it. But again, this is a good one to kind of give the eye a place to rest with a lot of the other very busy prints. You can't have birds without some foliage for them to hide in. And this one is a really fun one. I do believe we see it again, but it is really very pretty and very gorgeous. And I love these colors. These are so my colors. We've got some more dense foliage. This time it's starting to trend more green and a little bit of brown, but it's more like olivey green. And we're going to see more of that as we keep transitioning. This is our last scallop, and we've got it in the green again, so that way we can help transition into the darker colors. All right, this one we do have some more birds. You gotta look to find them. They are very tiny and they are hidden among all the flowers. They are very bright though, so they do kind of stand out a little bit against the green, but there's enough florals that are about their same color to where they can be camouflaged a little bit. This was one of my favorite prints in the collection. It's so moody. I love those dark blues and teals and how they work together, but how that green really makes it all pop. I loved finding a space to include this in each one of my blocks. Now we're transitioning into kind of the multicolor and the magenta prints. And this one is a lot going on in it, but it's really cool and it looks really great cut up in those half square triangles. And there are birds to find. We've got a little one hiding out here. There may be a couple more. That's the one that stands out to me the most though. But there's just so much happening and it's so fun. This one is about the same colors in it, but it's on a much smaller scale. So it has a completely different effect to it. This one also looks really fun when it is cut up into those half square triangles. This one reminds me of like a really busy block print because there's so much going on in it. And this one is definitely in that magenta colorway. We have one after this that's even more magenta. We do have a couple of birds in this one too. They're kind of hidden away within the flowers. We've got more plants and what kind of looks like succulents and vases going all over the place in this one. This is also one that really pops when you include it in your blocks. You want to make sure you spread that out as best you can. And last but not least, we have our dark background with all those bold colors against it with all the florals. And this is just such a stunning print. It looks so good. This will make a great extra border if you want to make it a little bigger or backing. Just absolutely fabulous. Well, that is Find the Birds from FreeSpirit Fabrics. It's absolutely gorgeous, and adding in those extra scallops in there just really helps fill out this color story and will make it work for the quilt that we're going to be making here next. And don't forget, if you want to grab this, you don't have to be a member to get a quilt kit. We do have extras while supplies last. And if you are a member, you can get what's called the finishing kit, which includes everything you didn't receive in your bundle, plus your background and your binding. So it's really fun. We're using one of these scallops in black and white for the binding. It's going to be a fun one. Let's get started with the tutorial. We're going to kick it off with a really in-depth half square triangle tutorial. If you've ever ended up with half square triangles where the points didn't match up the way they were supposed to, or the center seam wasn't exactly straight, it looked more like a smiley face or a frowny face, depending on whether you're half glass full, half glass empty kind of a person, this is going to be for you. I like to use a 2 at a time method for making my half square triangles because when we're sewing on this, it's a bias. So it gets a little bit more stretch there than it does when we're going along the side seams that we're used to. But when you stitch along this, when it's still attached to the other half of our triangle unit, you're going to have a lot better results because there's something on the side there. But if we cut that first and then we sew it together, that's when you're much more likely to end up with those stretched out seams along your half square triangles. Because there's all kinds of things that can happen. You could stretch it, your machine could need service, or it could just be at the end of its lifespan. All manner of things can happen, but this helps avoid a lot of that. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to draw a line down the center. This one already has a really faint one. This is all you would need if you were doing it at home, but I'm going to do it again, get it a little darker for those of you who are at home. So I'm taking my ruler and I'm lining it up even with both points. And I like to take my friction gel pen. A mechanical pencil will work too. You just don't want to use like an ink pen or like a permanent marker, but I like to go from the center and work my way out. That way it stretches less as I do it, and I'm more likely to get right out on the points of that. That is the most important thing for you to do. I taught this class a lot in person, and a lot of times people think, oh, I'm a little off at the point. It's no big deal. I'll fix it when I'm like going through and stitching, but that's not how our brains work. We end up just following along with the line and then we're screwed up. So now we're going to take and we're going to layer right sides together with the other piece that we're putting this half square triangle with. For this one, we're going to have one half of the half square triangle be the background and one half be the print, the fat quarter print. There's going to be some where they're both fat quarter prints, but we're going to demo on this one because it's much easier to see the line on a nice solid piece of fabric than this busy bold fabric that we're working with this month. So normally when we sew, we line up the edge of the fabric with our presser foot to get our 1/4 inch seam. We're going to do that here, just it's going to be a little different because we are going to be lining up the presser foot with that line that we drew. So you're going to pretend that that line is the edge of your fabric, and we're going to stitch all the way down one side, and then we're going to flip it around and we're going to stitch all the way down the other side. And that's going to create a scant 1/4 inch seam on both sides of that drawn line, which is going to give us the math that we need in order to cut this apart and have our triangles be the correct size. One thing you want to pay attention to when you're doing this is that you are sewing either an actual exact 1/4 inch seam or a little less. That's called a scant 1/4 inch seam, where you move your needle one needle width to the right, and then you're able to sew a little bit skinnier seam because you do not want it to be too fat. If it's too fat, then you're going to lose some real estate on this part of the triangle, and then when you go to square it up later, you might not have enough fabric to get your triangles to the correct size. So you want to make sure you've got that 1/4 inch correct first. All right, so I've got that edge of my presser foot lined up with that line that we drew, and I made sure to line up my 2 points. Once I've stitched a couple of the way down, what I do is I line up my points at the end too, and I kind of just hang on to that, because again, if those get off, then you're not going to have points end up where they need to be. So if you want to pin, feel free to kind of pin across your point here and across your point up there, and that'll help keep everything where it needs to be. Once I can't really hold on to the tip anymore, what I do is I put my finger to the side, and that way I can guide and make sure that I maintain that 1/4 inch stitch all the way down to the end. Sometimes when you have smiley or frowny faces at the edge, it's because you were not consistent with your 1/4 inch seam all the way through. Now, if you have a bunch of these to do, like for this quilt, you can chain piece by lifting your presser foot up and sliding the next one under and going all the way down one side on your blocks. And then when you're all done, you can lift your needle up. No need to even take anything apart there or cut any threads. And we're just going to stitch down the other side. So now is a good time for a quality checkpoint. If you've never done this technique before, I recommend that you do one and you make sure that everything is going right, and if not, diagnose where things are going wrong before you do any more. What you want to do is you want to lay your ruler down and have one edge even with your first stitching line, and then look to see where your second stitching line falls. Mine falls exactly in between my 3/8 inch mark and my 1/2 inch mark, which is perfect. That means that I sewed a scant 1/4 inch seam, and so I'm less than that 1/2 inch. You want to be on the 1/2 inch or smaller, but not smaller than 3/8 of an inch, because we don't want this seam to end up being too skinny. But we also want to make sure that we have enough wiggle room on the outside of the triangle so we can trim it up to size later. So now I'm going to take my ruler and I'm going to line it up with that center line, and I'm going to go ahead and cut straight down. And it's not super important that you cut straight on the line, but you don't want to be too close on either side, because if your seam gets too skinny, then that's going to compromise your quilt over time. That seam can pop open, sometimes even when you just put it on the long arm and it gets kind of stretched a little bit, but definitely with wear and tear, the skinnier that seam is, the more likely it is to have a problem later on. So this one's pretty good. It's pretty straight down the center, but if you end up where one side's a little fatter than the other, just take a look and see how skinny is this seam. If it is less than 1/8 of an inch, you have a problem. You need to redo that for sure, because you're going to have trouble pressing it open and it's not going to wear as well over time. All right, so you can see we now have our 2 1/2 square triangles. We have a few more steps until they're really ready to go. The first thing we have to do here is we need to press it open. So to press your seams open, you're first going to open up that seam with your fingers, and you're going to put the tip of your iron down the center. Then I like to take at least 3 fingers and kind of finger press that open, keeping it ahead of the iron to kind of keep that ready and open to go. Then I'm going to flip it over, and I'm going to also press from the right side as well to get that nice and flat. The reason why I like to do this, especially on triangle points, is it makes for a really, really flat seam. So when we later sew this together and match it up with other triangle points, we end up with a really fantastic looking join, but also it's super flat underneath, which opens up a lot of possibilities when we start to quilt. And I know that there are people who, we call them quilt police, who tell you you can't do this. I have done more than 100 quilts in my lifetime so far, probably more than 100, but 100 original patterns, more than that. And I have pressed the majority of them with the seams open. I never had a problem, and I long arm them. And I stitch really close to the seam line with them. And everything has always turned out really well for me and has worn beautifully over time. And I'm actually able to do more things when the seams are pressed open than when they're pressed to the side. So don't listen to that. You can do this and you'll love the way your seams turn out. So now it's time to give this a trim. So when I do the math for my 2 at a time half square triangles, what I do is I add a full inch to the finished size. Technically, you only have to add 7/8 of an inch for the math to turn out right for this finished square. So we're going to trim a little bit off the sides. One of the reasons why I do that, though, is because one, it leaves you with enough to trim off so you end up with the right size square in the end, so all your blocks will fit together nicely. But also, if you get too fat of a seam allowance, or you mess up or something just maybe you didn't cut right to start with, that is going to give you more wiggle room here, so that way you're still going to be successful and not have to rip everything out and start over. So trimming here is really important for when it comes to making sure that all your points are going to come together nicely. We want to make sure that we have our 45-degree line going straight down the center seam. This is a very extreme example, but if I were to cut like this, then my point is nowhere near the corner of my block, and I'm never going to have that point end up where it needs to be. But even just being off a little bit can cause that and make it harder to get good joints. So you really want to pay attention. This is one of the most important lines to pay attention to. The other places you want to look at is making sure that you have some fabric hanging past the line that you want to trim it to. In this case, it's 4.5, and across the edges. The other thing I'm going to do that we don't always show you because it's like off camera is I'm going to stand up to cut this, as I find that I get a better bird's eye view and more accurate trimming. One time I had to trim a bunch of these and I was like 8.5 months pregnant, and I trimmed them all sitting down. Those were not my best half square triangles, folks. It's, you know, we all have moments where we just can't do it. And if you are limited in your mobility, maybe just do it in batches. So that way you can trim it and you can sew some, and then you can stand up and trim some, stretch your legs a little bit, and then go back to sitting down, because you're going to get a lot more better results that way. But do whatever modifications you need to do to make it work for your body. All right, so I've got everything lined up where I want it to be. I'm putting my palm down so that way my ruler is not going to slip on me, and my pinky is to the side. That also helps with slipping. I also want to make sure that I have a nice sharp blade so that it's not kind of pushing the fabric out of the way. And we can see that that trimmed really nice right into that corner, so I'm going to have no problems making that fit later. So we're going to give that a 180-degree flip, so my cut sides are now on the left and the bottom. If you are left-handed, this is going to be in reverse for you guys. I think my 3-year-old is left-handed. I'm going to have to figure out how to teach her backwards when the time comes. But at this point, we want to line up exactly on the measurement that we need to be on. So we got 4.5 exactly on the edges here, because I've already trimmed that. My 45-degree is still going straight down that center. So that way I'm going to have my seam go straight into the corner of this block. Now you can see we did not trim that much off of this, but you can see a marked size difference between the one that has been trimmed and the one that we haven't trimmed already. So this really does make a big difference in how easy it is to assemble your block and then later your quilt. I remember one of the first triangle quilts I did, I skipped the trimming step on all of the triangle units thinking it's no big deal, it'll be fine. And as I was sewing that together and then later quilting it, I was like, that was a big deal. I should have taken the time, I should have done it. So that's another thing that, you know, just do it in batches and it won't be so bad. I'm going to trim up this one and then we're ready to assemble our block. So this is a very large block, which helps the quilt go a little bit faster. When I sew this together, I'm going to sew it into rows first, and then I'm going to join my rows. But what I'm going to do here is I'm going to kind of like sew all of this half together and then lay it back out, then do the same thing for the other, then join my halves. I like to chain piece whenever I can. It kind of speeds everything up and helps things go a little faster. There isn't a whole lot of pinning that we need to do at this point in the block. There really is only one point where we really need to focus on that, and that's whenever we have two triangles that are going to be meeting up here, because these seams are going to need to be on top of each other in order for those points to look good in the end. So like this one, we got a point at the bottom and a point at the top. That's no big deal. We don't have to pin that. This one is going from a half square triangle to a square. So again, no problem there. This row, not going to need to pin anything. This row, not going to need to pin anything. This one down here, we're going to need to pin these guys here. But at this point, there's not a lot that has to get pinned in order to be accurate, unless you're someone who likes to pin at the top and bottom of your blocks to make sure that those come together. I've been doing this long enough to where I can make that happen, no problem. And because everything has been trimmed to size, I know that all my half square triangles are going to be the same as these background units, so there's not going to be that much fudging that needs to happen to make it work. So in this case here, where I have these two triangles that need to be pinned, so that way these are meeting at the same spot, we're going to go ahead and flip them so they're right sides together. Then what I do is I hold them upright. And this is really easy to see because we have a really kind of lighter fabric here and nice and bold ones here. So I want to just layer those so that those seams are right on top of each other. So if you were to peel it back, they would still be one on top of the other. Then what I do is I'm going to pin in the right side of the seam allowance where they're going to be joined. And I always pin in the right side because in this case what I'm going to do is I'm going to set it up and I'm going to stitch just a couple of stitches in until I've got my needle down in the first half of that seam allowance. That kind of acts like a pin and will allow me to remove this pin so that way I can keep sewing all the way down. And then when we open everything back up, we're going to have really great joints up top. One thing I'm going to do before I start sewing here is move my sewing machine back to a regular 1/4 inch seam. We only need that scant quarter inch seam when we're making our half square triangles, but now in order to get it to fit together properly, we want the regular one. All right, so I'm going to set that underneath my sewing machine, and I'm going to take those first couple of stitches, and I've got my needle down in that first half of that seam allowance. So now it's time when I'm going to pull that pin, because I can keep it together with that needle, and now I can arrange my points at the bottom and continue stitching along. The rest of these, I'm just going to align my top with my bottom and stitch down because I don't have anything that I need to pin because I've no points coming together. So I'm not going to press at this step, but I am going to get all my pieces that I've chain pieced cut apart and laid back out on my mat. I want to make sure that I get everything back in the right spot because I regularly misplace that sometimes. And this is a good time to check with your pattern to make sure everything is still looking the way it is supposed to. All right, this one's looking good. So I'm going to go ahead and sew down the second half of the rows. And again, we only need to pin at this bottom one because that's the only place where we've got triangle seams that are coming together. All right, I've got all my rows sewed into twosies, so now we're going to join them so that we have our foursies put together. Again, we have no triangle points that need to match at this point because they all either are going to a square or they're at opposite ends of the block. So I can just sew this and no problem, no pins. So now I'm going to press all of my rows open. And again, I like to press it open just like I have everything else. And you're going to see that this seam here is skinny. I'm worried about this seam. Like I said, I didn't do all of these this time. And that's a little tiny for my liking. Someone did double stitch it. But that one might not go together as well as it's supposed to, and it might not stand the test of time. So that is definitely an example of one that's too skinny. You can see based on this to what an actual quarter inch seam looks like, that it's tiny. So try to avoid that. All right, once I press everything open from the wrong side, I'm going to give it a flip over here, and I'm also going to press from the right side with my spray mister. So I'd like to use my spray mister instead of water in my iron because every iron I've ever put water into eventually gunks up and spits. And so for this one, what you do is you just put it in the aerosol spray mister and then it creates a fine little mist instead of droplets. And so you're able to really easily mist it and get the effects of steam without actually having to have steam in your iron. And I find that when I spray it and I go over it, especially with the combination of the Aliso and my wool pressing mat, I get fabulously flat seams, and you can see that this join is just absolutely fantastic and looks great. So that was definitely worth taking the time to do that. Now, when I was putting these together, what I did was I would do one at a time like that. And then I would just kind of make sure once I'd press the next one that it was looking okay and that everything was kind of transitioning the way it was supposed to before I went forward. Because it's a lot easier to, if a triangle's turned the wrong way, to fix it at this stage than once your block is already together, because then you have to kind of perform surgery on it and extricate the one that's not quite right and then get it back where it belongs. But you can see, I mean, this looks pretty good. You can definitely see that there's some volume in there. But once I spritz this and I go over it here, this thing is going to be like one with my pressing mat. It's going to be so flat. That looks 100 million times better. So what I do is I kind of line this up and I can see that it's starting to transition this way. So I know that that's correct and I've got it in the right spot. So I stack it on top and continue on with the rest of my rows. All right, so you can see everything is exactly where it should be. We're getting that kind of elongated shape going. And at this point, we're going to pin our rows together, our bottom two and our top two rows. And at this point is when we're going to kind of add another level of pinning. I'm going to show you my two pinning technique to make sure that when you have triangle points that come together like here and here, that you're able to really make sure that everything is right where it should be. So once we sew this together, you get a nice even line going from this triangle to the next. So if you've done this right and you've sewn your 1/4 inch seam, then your triangle point is going to be about 1/4 inch in on both sides from the edge of the fabric. That's exactly what we want to see, because then when we join them, we sew our 1/4 inch seam, they're going to be right where they belong. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip these guys right sides together, and part of the benefit of pressing these seams open is we can see where they're all coming together. So we have our center seam, but then we also have the little tiny triangle seam that's shown right here. So I'm going to put my pin in right at the top of that little tiny triangle seam and right down the center of that seam. Then I'm going to find the same point here. So we have our middle seam joining our two blocks, but then we also have our triangle seam. So again, I'm going to pin right at the top of that triangle. That way they're going to be sitting right on top of each other. Now this is a great example that when you do this, sometimes your edges aren't matched up. My blue is sticking out a little bit further than my magenta here, but that's okay because my points are going to be on top of each other, and I'd rather have it be off a teeny bit on the inside than have my points not match up on the outside, because ultimately no one's going to see what's going on the inside of your quilt, but they sure are going to notice if your points are not there. Now I'm not going to actually secure this with this point. I want to pinch it between my thumb and forefinger so it's going straight through, and I'm keeping those those points right on top of each other. I'm going to take a second pin and I'm going to pin in that right side of the seam allowance, right where my needle, I'm going in right where my needle is going to go over, and then I come out maybe about a 1/2 inch in. And that way everything is where it should be. If I were to use this one and I rock that pin forward, my top point would go forward, my bottom point would go toward me, and then they would no longer be in alignment. So I can go ahead and pull that out once it's done and be confident that my points are where they should be. All right, I've got to do that again on this one here. Find the tip of that triangle point. This one, they did line up exactly. Again, sometimes that happens, sometimes it doesn't. I don't really worry about it either way because what matters is where those points are going to be on the outside of the block. Now this one, we have two just straight seams. So for that one, we can just do like we did when we were matching up those points. And just make sure our seams are right on top of each other. I'm going to pin in that right side of that seam allowance. And then on the end here, I have two 45-degree angles that are coming together. So I'm going to pin those together as well. Now, when I'm sewing this, ideally, it's always going to be this triangle point here. It's going to be a 1/4 inch away from the edge of your fabric, and you're just going to be able to go right over it. But if it isn't, you want to aim to be one needle width to the right of where the tip of that point is, because then when you open it up, the points are going to just nest perfectly right next to each other. It's going to be fantastic. I'm going to follow the same methods to pin my top row, and then we're going to press these open and show you what it looks like. All right, so I've got that first pin in, and I'm going to leave it in just for a second, just so I can get a couple stitches in, really secure the first half of that seam allowance, then pull my pin. This is why I'm not a fan of those presser feet that have kind of a guide right here, because it's really hard to go over pins with them. And then it gets harder to have good joins. So I really like the ones that don't have it when I'm doing precision pinning. All right, so we're going to stitch again until our needle is down in that seam allowance. Then I'm going to take my pin out because that needle is going to hold everything together. I don't have to worry about things shifting that I took a long time to pin before. All right, I'm going to slow down. I'm going to make sure that I'm sewing just to the right of where that triangle is, and then I can speed up coming out of there. And again, this one, I need to kind of take a peek, see where I'm aiming for. I want to be just to the right. I did kind of have to come in a little. I'm not sewing a full 1/4 inch seam at this one. It's a little skinnier than that, but it's okay. It's going to be fine in the end. So now what I'm doing, I've got my points lined up the edge. And I'm just going to kind of get back to my regular 1/4 inch seam. I didn't have to go too far, just a little bit. And we're going to stitch all the way down. Now what I did at this point to speed it up even more is before pressing, I opened up my blocks, made sure everything was lined up properly, and then I'm going to go ahead and pin these together so I can press all at one time to get the block together. And I did that because I was doing this one block at a time with this quilt. A lot of times I'll stack everything up and do everything all at once, but I didn't end up doing that this time because I had some help getting it together, so they were all kind of arranged as individual units. So that was a little speed trick for me if that's how you prefer to do it as well. Now for this one, the only ones that I need to worry about pinning those triangles and doing that 2 pinning is going to be right here because we have all of the triangles coming together. But here we just have to make sure that our seams are on top of each other, and then we just need to make sure that our ends end up at the same spot. So I'm going to go ahead and pin that, and then we'll do the final press. All right, so now I'm ready to press this, and this is really not that different than pressing open before, except we have a lot of seams going in different directions. So you really want to make sure you are lifting and pressing that iron so we don't accidentally push something going in a direction we don't want it to go in. So I'd especially pay good attention to where those seam joins are coming together, especially if you had, like this one, I had to come in a little bit. It's not quite as thick, so I really need to spend some extra time on that join as I work my way across. So I'm going to do that for all of my joins, and then we're going to give this one final spray with the spray mister on the other side and a final press. All right, so we're going to flip that so the right side is up. My seam joints are looking fantastic. I love how these are looking. This is really just going straight across. This one is just a smidge off, but it's good enough. It'll look good. And you wouldn't necessarily have seen that if we would have pressed something going under or any which way. All right, so we're going to do one final, just go over everything here with our spray mister. And I'm just going to really hit especially those seams that I just did really well with it. So I'm going to go straight down the seams here. I like to really miss those pretty good because then that helps the block lie super flat. All right, that is looking fantastic. I love how these joins came together with that 2 pinning method. There's like no guesswork. You know that you had it together. You know that you're going to have a really nice straight line as these half square triangles are joining, which is going to allow me to do some fun things with quilting when we put this together later. So that is Singularity, and you can grab the pattern on our website, shop.quiltaddictsanonymous.com. You can watch a tutorial there and have a lot of fun putting this together. Now, if you are not a member of Stashin with Stephanie, you can get the pattern and you can get a quilt kit to go along with that if you like, and just get it a la carte, or you can join. And again, you get so much for your $1 there. When you join, you're going to get a coupon to download any 12 Stashin with Stephanie PDF patterns that you want. That's a $144 value right away. About a month after you join, you'll get your shipping notification for your first bundle. That's a $40 value that you paid $32.49 plus shipping for. And then you're going to get 20% off any additional fabric you order. So if you join right away and then on your second purchase you get this kit, then you are going to be able to save 20% on that first kit that you purchase as well, and have something to do while you're waiting for your first bundle. Then every month after that, you're going to get 2 patterns, a coupon for 2 patterns that you can download, any 2 Stashin with Stephanie patterns, and that's a $24 value. Once you've been a member for 6 months or more, you get access to every single Stashin with Stephanie pattern that we have available as a PDF. That is more than a $400 value. So it pays to be a member for a while, but you can come and go as needed. And then also you get 20% off any additional fabric that you want to purchase, and 30% off my 2 books, Fat Quarter Workshop and Fat Quarter Patchwork Quilts. So check out all the things, grab your copy of Singularity for the pattern, get a quilt kit while supplies last, and until next time, happy quilting.